Hey everyone, and welcome to part two of this video series where I was covering exactly what I would do if I had to start again to make a 50% return in the commercial property market within 9 months. Now, in the first video, we covered step one, which was finding, sourcing, and locating a property, and then step two, which was running the feasibility. And I made two really important points in that video. The first important point was you need to engage with sales and leasing agents and valuers, and you need to do so with authenticity and real genuine approach to commercial property. What do I mean by that? I mean you need to interact with them on a consistent basis, and when they offer properties, give them feedback. Okay, so I covered that in the first video. I also covered that when you're running your feasibility, it's really great to imbue your feasibility with conservatism such that you have confidence of achieving the outcomes you want to achieve. Now, the feasibility gives you a numerical answer for all of the inputs that you gather pre the purchase, but also during your due diligence period. And that's what I'm going to cover now: the contracting, securing of the property, and due diligence. I want your feasibility to be a living, breathing thing. When I buy a property now, I often have the feasibility up in front of me, and I would literally use it and change it on a daily basis, sometimes every hour. And I'll be on the phone with a valuer saying, "Hey, what do you think about that assumption? Should I change it? Should I upgrade it? Should I manipulate it? Am I being too conservative? Am I being not conservative enough? What are you seeing in the market? What should I put in there?" I would genuinely be having those conversations with valuers. And I want you to understand that the commercial property market is a fantastic one for conversations because valuers and agents want to pay it forward because that means they're going to get the next deal. Okay, so that's what I covered in video one. So in part two here, I'm going to cover contracting, securing a property, your due diligence, manipulating value, and what to do next. With that being said, let's get right into it, okay? So weeks 13 to 16. This is where I want you placing offers. Okay, so now you've found, sourced, or located a property. You've engaged with the agents who are giving you off-market opportunities, and there's also opportunities online. You're taking opportunities that you like and you're assessing them through the framework or the lens of your feasibility. Now, if your feasibility tells you there's going to be value to be made, there's going to be upside to be enjoyed or a great return, then I want you going and placing offers to try and secure such property. Now, this is not 100% success game. I want you thinking about a 1 in 4 success rate, okay? The reality is that you're not going to win them all, but it's actually better to let the property go if the price is going to be too high or if the terms are going to be unpalatable for you. So I really want you thinking about the terms that you can afford to offer, okay? As in what price you can afford to pay. And then I want you thinking about what price you should be paying. And your conversations with valuers and agents will help inform that. The other thing I want you thinking about is how many other buyers are currently looking at that property and competing with you. That's the beauty of off market, where you may not be competing with any other buyers, which is a fantastic set of circumstances. So maybe you can be slightly more aggressive in your buying price or terms. But if you're competing on the open market and there's an open campaign, well, you might just have to be aware that this might take a few weeks to secure the property, and you also might have to pay slightly more than your hopeful amount of money. Just make sure your feasibility still tells you the right answer, okay? And as I said, you can expect a success rate here of about 1 in 4. Now, that doesn't mean it needs to take 13 to 16 weeks. I mean, you could place 4 offers on a property in 1 day if you wanted to. You could place 4 different offers every day for the whole week, and you might have 20 offers out. So it all depends on the amount of time you want to allocate to this, and I suppose how many irons you want to have in the fire at any one time. But as I say, don't be expecting to get 100% success rate on the offers you place. Importantly, throughout this step, you need to maintain conversations with agents and valuers. You'll see that me sprinkling this exact same underlined bullet point across this entire sequence, the part 1 and part 2, because it is so important and it costs you nothing and it creates incredible value for you, okay? Now, there's a couple of things I want to make sure that you would be doing and what I would be doing if I were to buy my property starting again. I would be ensuring there is sufficient due diligence time to actually finish my due diligence. Okay. So I would start with a 45-day due diligence period, typically. Now, agents will usually push back and ask for 30 days. I would usually try and make sure that 45 days is achievable. But if it's not, what I sometimes do is say, okay, well, I'll take a 30-day due diligence period. But if I get to day 29 and I'm not satisfied, I want the right to extend my due diligence by 2 weeks by paying a $5,000 non-refundable deposit, for instance. Okay. Now that might mean you risk $5,000, but it might also mean that you have the ability to lock in a tenant before due diligence is up. It might mean that you have the ability to find a new tenant before the due diligence is up. It might mean that you can keep security of a property that you think is going to make you incredible amounts of money because your finance hasn't been approved yet. So it just gives you optionality and more time to bring all of the bits and pieces into one fruition outcome such that you can actually confidently go ahead with a de-risked property outcome. Okay. So I'd rather pay for more time than risk all of my money equity if I haven't got exactly what I want to see during my due diligence period. So I use that as a really clever way of giving myself a bit of additional time if I needed to. Now remember, if you get to day 29 and you don't like what you're seeing in due diligence, well, obviously you're not going to pay the extension fee, are you? So you're not going to risk money there. Okay. I would also ensure there is sufficient finance window. Now, usually that will happen during the due diligence window. Okay. Now, in different markets at different times, different things become industry standard. But at the moment, for the last 2 or 3 years, it's typical that finance gets achieved during the due diligence window. So, bankers and financiers and finance brokers are usually wanting about 30 days to get their finance sorted as well. So if you're going to engage a broker on day 1 of your due diligence, you can usually expect they're going to take 28 to 30 days to give you that formal approval that you're going to need. Okay. So just make sure that you don't agree to a too short a time frame in your due diligence or your finance so that you're scrambling at the end and you're jeopardizing the outcomes that you actually want to create. Make sure you give yourself enough time, and if you need more time, pay for it. I'd rather risk $5,000 on paying for a slight extension than going unconditional and risking it all. Okay. I said that it's typically completed during the due diligence phase. Okay. I also want you to ensure there's sufficient settlement window in place, right? Now, usually it's very common in the industry to say 30-30-30, which is a 30-day due diligence, 30-day finance, and 30-day settlement. So I usually like to start with a 60-day settlement period. Again, if you don't ask, you don't get. But agents will typically push back on that and want you to bring that down to about 45, maybe to 30 days if you want. Sorry, if you can. Now, what I'll often do here is I'll say, look, okay, I'll agree to a 45-day settlement window or a 30-day settlement window. But when I'm about to go unconditional, okay, after I've done my due diligence now and I'm likely to go unconditional, that's when I might ask for a bit more time if I need it. Now, you don't want to get in the habit of that, but if I genuinely am going to need an extra 60 days, I'll go to the seller, and I'll say, look, I'm willing to waive my due diligence subject to you giving me a 60-day settlement window. And typically speaking, sellers are usually pretty comfortable with that. Okay, then you're on a step 4, conducting your due diligence and securing your finance. Now, I've done an entire YouTube video on exactly what I would do during my due diligence if I could only ask 2 questions of a tenant, and that covers 90% of the things that I actually want to know during due diligence. And in that video, I just covered a very simple framework. So I'll just glance over that framework here, right? But between weeks 17 and 20, this is what I would be doing. I'd be running my due diligence. So please do see my YouTube video on exactly what makes up a fantastic due diligence with 2 simple questions. You can cover 90% of your property due diligence just with those 2 questions, okay? But ultimately, what you're trying to understand is the property, premises, or location, which means that you want to know the structural integrity of the building, the roof, the 4 walls, the ceiling grid, the floor, the roller doors, the entry, the aircon, the fire services, the compliant toilets, the accessibility. You want to understand the fabric of what you're buying, okay? You also want to understand the land underneath the 4 walls that you're buying. Are there environmental concerns? Are there caveats on the land? Is it freehold property or strata property? Is there road widening that's going to come over the next little while? Is there any gazetted changes to the planning or council approvals or zoning changes in the area? All of those things will impact the land under which your property and ultimately your tenant are going to reside. Okay, so you really need to understand that. Then you want to understand the tenant and the lease, and I really urge you to get a lease review done by a lawyer here. So if there is a tenant in place, then please take the lease and get it reviewed. Make sure that that lease encompasses the entire agreement between the landlord and the tenant. Get a lawyer to review it, and they'll usually highlight a few red flags and say, actually, you know what, this over here can be a bit risky for you. Make sure you do a bit more due diligence there. And I would also then usually like to conduct some kind of tenant interview, which is a lot more formal than what I actually intend here. The intent here is that you want to have a conversation, an open conversation with the tenant, right? And I cover exactly what to ask in my YouTube video about due diligence there, right? So you want to understand their performance on their trade. There's two major questions you got to ask. Please see my other YouTube video where I break that down in detail. The last thing you want to understand in your due diligence is the local, national, and global market. Okay, so this covers things like supply and demand. So is there an oversupply of the property that you're currently trying to buy? If there is, it might mean that there is ample chance for your tenant to vacate. If there's a very limited supply, it might mean that your tenant's very sticky. They may not have the chance to vacate your premises. You also want to understand demand. For instance, demand of office assets obviously went through a real slump after COVID. Now that's an example of a national and a global pandemic that actually impacted demand for office assets. So you really want to take into account not just the local and national, but also the global picture, okay? And importantly, you really want to understand the difference between the passing rent and the market rent. Now, I cover that in my online course. It's one of the most fundamental ways of making money out of property is understanding how to take advantage of the differential between passing and market rent. Okay, if you want to learn more about that, please find me at investorcode.com.au or on my online course. Okay, once you've done your due diligence, okay, and remember, during your due diligence, you need to continue to be conversing with the agent and the valuer to continue to get the information that you need to assess the property in a really pragmatic fashion, okay? It's a time when you're consistently going back to your feasibility and you're plugging in new numbers and you're going, well, what happens if it's a 12% incentive? What happens if it's an 11% incentive? What happens if the incentive ends up being 15%? And it'll tell you what all of that means for your end outcome, okay? So I want you living and breathing that during your due diligence period. I want you conversing with agents and valuers on a weekly basis as an absolute minimum, okay? And you can test your assumptions with those counterparts. You can actually chat to a valuer and say, look, I'm putting this into my model. What do you think? Okay? Really, really great sources of information. Then it comes to the exciting part. And this is how to manipulate value. So what have we done so far? We've sourced a property. We've run our feasibility, which has told us that there's a really good chance of making money in a de-risked way. Then we're going ahead and secured the property. Once we've secured it, then we start our due diligence. And our due diligence and our finance is about battle testing the feasibility that we had done at the start. So we start to test all those assumptions now. But then it comes to the point of actually bringing that value to fruition. How do you actually bring about an uplift, an upward shift in the valuation of a property during the due diligence window, if you can, or imminently upon owning an asset, as in within the first 3 to 6 months? How do you do that? Well, between weeks 21 to 40, this is what I want you thinking about. Immediately, once you become the landlord, you got to start chatting to your tenants. You want to understand what they want. You want to understand what they need. You want to understand what's good, what's bad, what's going good for them, what's not going good for them. You want to try and understand all of that during your due diligence, but the conversation doesn't end there. You got to continue those conversations because your tenant is the biggest investor in your asset and in your financial future here, actually. The tenant's going to pay for the rent, which is going to cover not just the money in your pocket, but it's also going to cover the outgoings, and it's going to cover the costs of ownership, and it's going to cover the interest of the bank, And it's going to mean that you end up with money in your bank account at the end of the day or not. You really need to spend the time to build a relationship with the tenant. Now, this is not only going to be important for this property, but it could give you incredible amounts of value when you understand a tenant's demands and drivers for potential future acquisitions. So you might chat to the tenant and they might say, hey, this property is great for me. Look, this is exactly what I want. I want to be here for the next 10 years. I want to sign a new 10-year lease and everything just goes great. It's green lights everywhere. The tenant also might say, look, I'm really enjoying this location, but I'm actually looking at opening a new store in a different state. And you might say, wow, that's incredible. What you're looking for. All of a sudden, you now have a mandate from a tenant and you can go find a new property to match with that mandate and you've made more money, okay? So when you negotiate here, it's actually more about just conversing with the tenant and really understanding what they want. If the property is vacant, then you want to obviously start your leasing campaign, and you want to maintain conversations with agents and valuers throughout all of this, as I keep saying, okay? You also want to seek specific advice here for how to position your property, your specific set of circumstances, your specific the fundamentals and the characteristics of the specific property that you own. How can you position that more competitively than the market? Okay, that might be things like, getting fantastic photography done, or getting a drone flyover, or getting a 3D mapping of the property and putting that up online. Or it might be offering greater incentives, or it might be offering greater capex, or it might be installing a mezzanine because a lot of tenants want a mezzanine in this particular size and shape. Or it might be, extending the hard stand, or it might be putting solar on the roof so you've got the right green credentials, or it might mean replacing the air conditioning so that your building has a greater efficiency, or it might be, universal accessible toilets because you're trying to attract a government tenant or you're trying to attract a medical tenant. What are the things that you can do to give your property the edge? Don't wait 6 months for the market to tell you what they want. Do it straight away and engage the tenant market in the most healthy way possible. I said this in video 1 or part 1 of this sequence, but I would rather spend money on upgrading my property now rather than spending that same amount of money on loss of income from waiting on the market too long without a tenant. So again, the ethos here, the thinking here is, if you're going to spend money on a property, why don't you improve it such that the value is getting higher with the capital that you're spending and you're improving the leasability, all right? You also want to secure the upside with a signed agreement or a signed lease, okay? It doesn't have to be a lease necessarily, but you want some form of written agreement. And I covered exactly what document to use in order to do that in the quickest, swiftest, and most secure way, most nimbly in my online course, okay? Now, once you've done this, you have essentially manipulated the value of your property. You may not have crystallized that value yet, but if you're able to extend a lease, or you're able to improve the tenancy, or you're able to increase the rental profile, or you're able to kick out a bad tenant to put a better tenant in, or you're able to increase the net lettable area that a tenant's using, or you're able to, any number of those things, you are imbuing your property with upside, okay? You're manipulating value, which is what I love so much about this asset class. Once you've done that, then you're faced with the decision on whether you want to tap into the value you've created or otherwise crystallize the value you've created and sell the property, which is where we come to step 6, okay? This is week 40 onwards. Now, usually you can revalue the asset here. Now, if you're going to do that, it makes a huge amount of sense to use the same valuer that you used when you were buying the property, okay? Not only will that valuer have a vested interest, but you are now deepening your relationship with that valuer such that if you're looking to buy a property in the future, you've got a really good, trusted, confidant there and a property professional in the industry to lean upon. The other thing is that valuer is going to be really, really forthright and forthcoming with information for you, because now they've given you their time. You've used their services not one, but twice to buy it and now to revalue it. And so the valuer is like, hey, I'll continue to arm this person with information because it's likely I'll get repeated work from them, particularly if you have increased the value of the property. Because what do most people do then? They will say, thank you very much. I've increased the property value from 2 million to 2.5 million, 500 grand. Let's use that additional equity to buy the next one. Okay. And the valuer knows this, and he knows he's likely to get the next valuation exercise that you need done. Okay. So revalue the assets, an important step. Not only does it give you confidence that you have actually created the value, but you can then tap into that if you want to by refinancing the asset to enjoy access to that upside, to either go buy a boat or buy a holiday house or put in the bank account, or use it to buy your next commercial property investment. Okay. And obviously if you're going to do that, well, then you would start back at action 1. You would identify the available cash and equity allocation you've got. Let's say there's 500 grand, and you might say, cool, with that 500 grand in equity might allow me to buy $1 million commercial property. Okay. So if you're not going to do that, then the other step you could take is actually engaging a sales agent to sell the property. Okay. Now, if you're going to engage a sales agent, it would make sense again to use the same agent that you use to buy it. Now, you don't necessarily have to do that, but it can be a really fantastic way of what goes around comes around, of actually, saying thanks for putting you into the opportunity in the first place. And we often find that the property market does work in that way. It says, you gave that opportunity to me, or you allowed me to buy it and you helped me through that. I'll pay it forward and use you again. So you'll find that the property industry is very collegiate. It's very, very happy. It works on relationships and networks. And all you have to do here is be really genuine and authentic and try and look after people when they look after you. So if you're going to sell the property, you might want to engage the sales agent to help you do that. Or you might want to use them for both, to obviously sell the property you currently got and to find the next property you're looking for. Now, again, if you're looking for the next property, you would start at action 1, define how much money you've got, equity and cash available, and your mandate, as in what kind of property you're looking to buy, what sector is it in, office, retail, industrial, in what locations, with what type of lease structure in place. All of those things will then arm the agent to continue to assist you. Now, what is really important to understand here is that throughout this entire exercise, regardless of the fact that you may have actually picked one agent and one valuer to assist you with this transaction or any transaction, I want you to continue conversing with all of them. If you're chatting with 3 valuers, chat with all 3 of them throughout the entire exercise. If you're chatting with 6 agents, chat with 6 agents throughout the entire exercise. Now, you might not give all of your information away and you might not tell them all of your tips and tricks, but I want you continuing to converse with them and continuing to sprinkle opportunities through and ask them for information, because those live conversations will bring the next potential deal to your fingertips. And that is the next chance you have to creating 50% upside in your property. Okay. Now, if you think about it, as I've just mentioned there, it is an incredibly easy way that costs you nothing, but will bring you countless opportunities. Okay. So what have I actually covered in the part 1 and part 2 series of these video sequence? I've covered 6 simple steps in detail. The first thing you want to do is find, source, locate the property. Second thing you want to do is run your feasibility. And I made a real important mention that this comes before step 3, which is then contracting or securing the property in question. Once you've secured it, then you want to conduct your due diligence and you want to secure your finance. Once you've done that, you're now into the heavy chance to manipulate value. This is where the heavy hitting happens, right? You can manipulate value, increase value, and either sell the asset or hold the asset, which then might allow you to take your next best step into the commercial property market. Okay. I cover all of this in my online course, and I focus on 3 key actions that drive enormous value in every single property purchase that I've made. I teach you how to find properties and opportunities which allow this, and I will teach you the essential things you need to know and do to secure those opportunities, to de-risk them before you buy them, and then to add incredible value during your ownership period. Okay, I cover all this in my online course. So if you like what you see here, guys, please subscribe. Follow me for more at investorcode.com.au, And you can find my online course at the link in my bio. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in next week's video.